Waitresses usually enter through the back door. The laughter rolled across the ballroom like breaking glass, soft at first, then louder when Claire Bennett froze beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Imperial Crown Hotel. The lights above her shimmered against polished marble floors, so spotless she could see the reflection of her worn black heels staring back at her. For one terrible second, she wondered if she should turn around and leave before anyone noticed how badly she did not belong there. But it was already too late. Every eye in the room had landed on her. The annual Cole Foundation Gala was Manhattan's most exclusive event, the kind of night where billionaires shook hands beside Olympic athletes and old money families competed over who donated the larger check. Champagne flowed beneath gold-trimmed ceilings while a string quartet played softly near the grand staircase. Men in custom tuxedos laughed beside women draped in diamonds that probably cost more than Claire's apartment building. And right in the middle of all of it stood Claire, clutching a small catering clipboard against her chest like armor. Her black dress was simple, carefully stitched by hand after the zipper broke 2 years earlier. The fabric hugged her nervously rather than elegantly, and no amount of careful makeup could fully hide the exhaustion beneath her blue eyes. She had spent the last 10 hours balancing trays at Romano's Cafe downtown before rushing uptown on the subway, because another waitress had called in sick. She was only supposed to deliver a last-minute wine inventory to the catering manager upstairs. 5 minutes. That was all. 5 minutes inside the ballroom, then back to the kitchen corridors where people like her disappeared into the walls. But then a server carrying champagne brushed past her too quickly, forcing Claire sideways near the center of the room. Conversations paused. Heads turned. A woman wrapped in silver satin slowly looked Claire up and down before smirking into her martini glass. "Honey," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "the staff entrance is downstairs." A few people chuckled. Another man whispered something that made his wife laugh behind her hand. Claire felt heat crawl in her cheeks. She lowered her eyes, gripping the clipboard tighter while pretending not to hear them. She was used to people looking through her. New York practically trained rich people to pretend workers were invisible. But tonight somehow felt worse. Maybe it was the chandeliers. Maybe it was the orchestra. Or maybe it was because everyone in the room looked so certain that she did not deserve to breathe the same air they did. "I'm just looking for the catering supervisor," Claire said quietly. "Of course you are," the woman replied with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. More laughter followed. Claire swallowed hard. The humiliation sat heavy in her throat, but she forced herself to stand still. Rent was due in 4 days. Her mother's heart medication had already drained most of this month's tips. Pride did not pay bills. She took a slow breath and started backing toward the edge of the ballroom when the entire atmosphere suddenly shifted. It happened subtly at first. Conversations softened. Heads began turning toward the staircase. The woman mocking Claire straightened immediately, smoothing her dress as if preparing for inspection. Claire glanced upward. A tall man had appeared at the top of the marble stairs, one hand resting casually in his pocket. Adrian Cole. Even Claire recognized him instantly. America's youngest tech billionaire. Founder of Cole Dynamics. The man financial magazines called the Ghost of Wall Street because he rarely appeared in public unless absolutely necessary. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, but there was nothing flashy about him. No oversized watch. No elegant green. Just calm gray eyes scanning the ballroom with quiet precision. The crowd seemed to lean toward him automatically. Important people smiled too quickly. Investors adjusted their posture. Socialites suddenly looked nervous. Claire immediately looked away. Men like Adrian Cole existed in another universe entirely. But then something strange happened. Adrian stopped moving. His gaze locked directly onto her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. Claire's heartbeat stumbled. The room fell strangely quiet as Adrian descended the staircase one slow step at a time. His polished shoes echoed softly against marble while the orchestra awkwardly continued playing in the background. The woman beside Claire gave a tiny nervous laugh. "Mr. Cole," she called sweetly, "I think catering accidentally wandered into the ballroom." Adrian said nothing for a moment. He simply stopped beside Claire, his expression unreadable. Up close, he looked even more intimidating, not because he was cold, but because he seemed impossible to impress. Then his eyes flicked briefly toward Claire's trembling hands gripping the clipboard. Something softened there, barely noticeable, but real. Finally, Adrian looked back at the crowd. She didn't wander in, he said calmly. His voice was low, controlled, effortless. She's my guest. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Somewhere across the ballroom, a champagne glass slipped from Vanessa Whitmore's hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sound of breaking glass still hung in the ballroom air when every guest instinctively turned toward Adrian Cole. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the waiters carrying silver trays had frozen beside the walls. Claire stood perfectly still beside him, unable to understand what was happening or why one of the richest men in America had just claimed her in front of Manhattan's elite. Vanessa Whitmore recovered first. She forced a brittle smile and lightly touched the diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. Adrian, she said carefully, you did not mention bringing someone. Adrian's eyes shifted toward her without warmth. I do not remember needing permission. A few nervous laughs fluttered through the crowd before dying almost instantly. Vanessa's smile tightened. Claire could practically feel the tension spreading across the ballroom like invisible smoke. She wanted to disappear. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it over the orchestra. Mr. Cole, she whispered softly beside him. I think there has been some misunderstanding. Adrian glanced down at her. There is not. The certainty in his voice unsettled her even more. Claire looked around helplessly at the glittering room filled with strangers pretending not to stare. A moment ago, they had laughed at her shoes. Now, they looked terrified to even breathe near her. It made no sense. Adrian reached for the clipboard in her trembling hands and casually handed it to a passing catering manager. Take care of this, he said. The manager nodded so quickly he nearly dropped it. Of course, sir. Claire blinked in confusion. I really should get back downstairs, she murmured. My shift is not over. Tonight, Adrian said calmly, you are staying. Before she could answer, a silver-haired senator approached with his wife, both suddenly smiling too hard. Adrian, the senator said warmly, always full of surprises. Adrian gave a polite nod, but did not introduce Claire immediately. Instead, he studied the ballroom with quiet detachment, as if observing an experiment unfold exactly as expected. Claire noticed it then. He was not embarrassed by her presence. He was watching everyone else, measuring them. Across the room, Vanessa whispered something sharply to a group of socialites. One woman quickly looked away in shame after realizing Claire saw her. Another pretended to sip champagne while openly staring at Claire's dress. The humiliation from earlier still burned beneath Claire's skin, but now it mixed with something stranger. Confusion, curiosity, and beneath both of those emotions, fear. Because men like Adrian Cole did not notice women like her accidentally. Why are you doing this? She whispered quietly once the senator moved away. Adrian looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because 3 weeks ago, you did something nobody else did. Claire frowned slightly. I do not understand. But Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan's glowing skyline. And suddenly Claire saw exhaustion behind his composed expression. Not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. The kind that came from disappointment repeating itself too many times. 3 weeks ago, Adrian finally said, it was raining near Lexington Avenue. Claire's breath caught. The memory returned instantly. A crowded sidewalk. Cold rain soaking through. Her coat after a double shift at Romano's Cafe. A man in a charcoal jacket walking away too quickly after paying for coffee. And a black leather wallet left behind on the table beside the window. Claire stared at Adrian in shock. That was you. Adrian nodded once. The ballroom noise seemed to fade around her as the memory sharpened. She remembered grabbing the wallet and rushing outside into freezing rain. She remembered weaving through traffic while calling after him. Most people would have kept the money. The wallet had been thick with cash, credit cards, and a folded piece of paper with numbers that looked important. Claire had not even opened it fully. She had simply run after a stranger because returning it felt obvious. "You chased me for 4 blocks," Adrian said quietly. "You missed your bus." Claire swallowed hard. Anyone would have done that. Adrian's expression almost turned amused. "No, they would not." Claire looked down, suddenly uncomfortable beneath the weight of his attention. "It was just a wallet." "No," Adrian repeated softly. "It was not." Across the ballroom, guests continued secretly watching them while pretending not to. Vanessa looked furious now, though she masked it behind practiced elegance. Adrian noticed too. "Most people in this room," he said quietly, "believe character is measured by money." His eyes met Claire's again. "I stopped believing that a long time ago." For the first time since entering the ballroom, Claire noticed something else hidden beneath Adrian Cole's billionaire composure. Loneliness. It flickered there only briefly before disappearing again, but once she saw it, she could not unsee it. A server approached, nervously carrying 2 champagne glasses. Adrian took one, then handed the other to Claire without looking away from her. Her fingers brushed his for half a second. "Warm, steady, real. Relax," Adrian said quietly as the entire ballroom continued watching them in stunned silence. "You belong here more than most of them do." Claire had never held a champagne glass that probably cost more than her weekly grocery bill. Her fingers tightened carefully around the thin crystal stem as she stood beside Adrian. Near the ballroom windows, terrified she might accidentally drop it onto the polished marble floor. Outside, Manhattan glittered beneath the dark November sky. Thousands of city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass like another universe entirely. Inside, the tension surrounding them had only grown heavier. Conversations resumed slowly across the ballroom, but every laugh sounded forced now. Every glance toward Claire lasted slightly too long before quickly looking away. People were no longer mocking her openly. Somehow that felt even worse. "You are making them nervous," Claire whispered quietly. Adrian took a slow sip of champagne. "Good." She looked at him in surprise. He remained calm, one hand resting casually in his pocket, as if he had not just turned the most powerful people in New York against themselves with a single sentence. Claire still could not fully process any of this. 3 weeks ago, she had returned a lost wallet to a stranger in the rain. Tonight, that same stranger had stopped an entire Billionaire Gala for her. It felt unreal. "I really did not know it was you," she said softly. Adrian glanced toward her. "That is exactly why this matters." Before Claire could answer, the lights above the ballroom dimmed slightly. A spotlight swept toward the main stage where the master of ceremonies adjusted his microphone with a polished smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "thank you again for joining us tonight in support of the Cole Foundation's expansion initiative." Applause echoed politely across the ballroom. Claire instinctively stepped backward, assuming Adrian would return to the center of attention where he belonged. But instead, he remained beside her. "Tonight," the announcer continued, "Mr. Adrian Cole will reveal the new director personally selected to lead the Foundation's $50 million national outreach project." Excited murmurs spread instantly through the room. Claire noticed several guests straightening immediately. Women subtly fixed their posture. Men adjusted tuxedo jackets and exchanged strategic looks. Whatever this position was, everyone clearly wanted access to it. Vanessa Whitmore especially. She moved gracefully toward the front rows beside the stage, smiling confidently as cameras turned in her direction. Claire suddenly understood. This was supposed to be Vanessa's night. She leaned closer to Adrian. "I should definitely leave now." Adrian almost smiled. "No, Mr. Cole," Claire whispered urgently. "I do not belong in the middle of this." "Claire," he said calmly, "look around this room carefully." She hesitated before obeying. Wealth surrounded her everywhere. Diamonds flashed beneath chandeliers. Luxury watches glimmered beneath pressed tuxedo sleeves. Smiles looked polished enough for magazine covers. Yet somehow none of it felt warm. It felt rehearsed, calculated. "Most people here spent all evening trying to impress me," Adrian said quietly. You are the only person who treated me like a normal human being before knowing my name. Claire lowered her eyes. I was just doing the right thing. Exactly. His voice softened slightly. Do you know how rare that is? The announcer's voice echoed again through the ballroom. Mr. Cole, would you please join us on stage? Applause erupted immediately. Adrian finally stepped forward. The entire room shifted with him like iron filings pulled toward a magnet. Claire watched helplessly as he walked toward the stage beneath glowing lights and camera flashes. He looked perfectly composed, perfectly controlled, yet somehow completely alone despite hundreds of people surrounding him. Vanessa greeted him near the stairs with a dazzling smile. She touched his arm lightly while photographers captured the moment. You should have told me about your surprise guest, she said sweetly enough for nearby reporters to hear. Adrian removed her hand from his sleeve without expression. You seem very interested in her tonight. Vanessa's smile faltered for half a second. Only because everyone else is. Adrian said nothing. He simply stepped onto the stage while the ballroom applauded again. Claire remained frozen near the windows, wishing she could disappear into the wallpaper. She did not belong under chandeliers beside billionaires. She belonged behind coffee counters and subway turnstiles and crowded grocery stores where nobody looked twice at her. Yet somehow Adrian kept pulling her into the center of his world. On stage, the master of ceremonies smiled broadly beside Adrian. Everyone here has been eager to learn who will lead the foundation's new national arts initiative, he announced. Mr. Cole personally oversaw the selection process himself. Excitement buzzed across the room. Claire noticed several wealthy guests subtly preparing themselves for disappointment. Vanessa stood closest to the stage now, absolutely certain her name was about to be called. Adrian accepted the microphone slowly. The ballroom fell silent almost instantly. Even the orchestra stopped playing. Claire felt her pulse quicken again as Adrian scanned the crowd with unreadable calm. 3 weeks ago, he began quietly. I walked into a small cafe on Lexington Avenue after one of the worst business meetings of my life. The room listened carefully. I left behind something valuable, Adrian continued. Not because I am careless, because I wanted to remember whether honesty still existed when nobody was watching. Confused murmurs spread softly through the audience. Claire's stomach dropped. Adrian's gray eyes found hers across the ballroom. Most people failed that test long before they ever realized they were being tested, he said. Vanessa's smile slowly disappeared. Adrian stepped away from the podium then, descending the stage stairs while hundreds of wealthy guests watched in complete silence. Claire suddenly realized he was walking directly toward her again. And this time, the entire ballroom understood why. Claire could feel hundreds of eyes following Adrian as he crossed the ballroom toward her. The silence felt unreal now, heavy enough to press against her chest. Somewhere near the stage, camera shutters clicked rapidly while reporters whispered to each other in confusion. Nobody understood why the most private billionaire in New York had stopped his own gala for a waitress in a repaired black dress. Claire barely understood herself. Adrian stopped directly in front of her again, calm beneath the chandelier light while the city skyline glowed behind them through towering glass windows. Then, without looking away from her, he reached inside his tuxedo jacket and removed a familiar black leather wallet. Claire's breath caught instantly. Even from several feet away, she recognized the worn crease near the corner where rainwater had soaked the leather weeks earlier. This, Adrian said quietly into the microphone still resting in his hand, was returned to me by a woman who had every reason not to return it. Murmurs spread across the ballroom. Claire's stomach twisted. She hated being stared at. Inside this wallet, Adrian continued, was enough cash to cover 3 months of rent. Multiple black cards. Confidential business information. His gray eyes slowly swept across the crowd. And not $1 was missing. Nobody spoke. Vanessa Whitmore stood motionless near the stage, her expression slowly hardening beneath perfect makeup. Adrian turned slightly toward Claire. You never even opened it completely, did you? Claire swallowed nervously. I did not think it belonged to me. Adrian nodded once. almost as if confirming something important to himself. Exactly. He stepped beside her then and faced the ballroom fully. Most people spend years trying to prove their value to rooms like this, he said calmly. Claire Bennett did it in under 5 minutes while standing in the rain. The silence deepened. Claire felt heat rise in her face again, but this time it was different. Not humiliation, exposure. She wanted to tell him to stop looking at her like she mattered in front of all these powerful people. Yet part of her could not move, because nobody had ever defended her before. Not publicly, not like this. Vanessa finally stepped forward, recovering enough to smile again. Adrian, she said lightly, surely this is symbolic. You're not actually suggesting a waitress is qualified to lead a $50 million national foundation. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Claire felt the insult immediately, sharp beneath the polished tone. But Adrian did not react emotionally. Somehow that made him even colder. Interesting question, he replied. Tell me, Vanessa, which qualification matters more? His voice remained perfectly calm. The ability to impress wealthy donors at a ballroom, or the instinct to do the right thing when nobody important is watching. Vanessa's expression tightened. A few people quietly looked down at their drinks. Adrian continued before she could answer. Because one of those qualities changes lives. The other only photographs well. The ballroom went completely still. Claire could practically hear reputations cracking beneath the silence. Vanessa let out a short laugh that sounded brittle around the edges. You are embarrassing people for sport now. No, Adrian replied. They embarrassed themselves. His eyes briefly flicked toward the group that had mocked Claire earlier. None of them could meet his gaze anymore. Claire stood frozen beside him, overwhelmed by the strange mixture of fear and gratitude rising inside her. She had spent years learning how to shrink herself in public spaces. Blend in, stay quiet, avoid becoming the center of attention. Yet Adrian kept placing her directly beneath the spotlight, as if daring the entire room to challenge her worth again. He stepped toward the stage once more and motioned gently for Claire to follow him. Come with me. Mr. Cole, she whispered anxiously. I really do not think this is a good idea. Claire, he said softly enough that only she could hear, trust me. The words unsettled her more than anything else tonight. Because she wanted to. Against all logic, she wanted to trust him. Slowly, Claire followed him through the ballroom. Guests parted instantly to make room, their earlier arrogance replaced by cautious curiosity. Claire noticed the sudden shift everywhere now. Men who had ignored her before now nodded politely. Women who laughed at her shoes suddenly complimented her dress in strained voices. It made her stomach turn. Adrian noticed too. Do not let it fool you, he murmured quietly beside her. People often confuse proximity to power with respect. Claire glanced up at him. And what do you confuse it with? Adrian looked ahead toward the stage lights. Loneliness. The answer surprised her. Before she could respond, they reached the stage together. The master of ceremonies stepped aside immediately while cameras flashed brighter across the ballroom. Adrian turned toward the audience one final time. Tonight, he announced calmly, the Cole Foundation begins a national arts initiative for underserved communities across America. Excited murmurs spread again. Adrian extended his hand toward Claire. And the person leading that initiative, his voice softened slightly, is Claire Bennett. Absolute silence crashed across the ballroom. Claire stared at him in shock. Someone near the front actually gasped out loud. Vanessa's champagne glass nearly slipped from her hand again. What? Claire whispered breathlessly. Adrian looked at her steadily beneath the blinding stage lights. You reminded me that integrity still exists, he said quietly. That is rarer than talent, and far more valuable. Claire's eyes widened as the room around her blurred beneath camera flashes and stunned faces. Then, for the second time that night, the entire ballroom froze around the waitress they had laughed at only an hour earlier. For a moment, Claire genuinely thought she had misheard him. The ballroom lights felt too bright now, the stage too high beneath her trembling feet. $50 million. National Arts Initiative. Her name. None of it belonged in the same sentence together. Reporters immediately surged closer to the stage, cameras flashing so rapidly that white bursts of light reflected across the crystal chandeliers overhead. Claire instinctively stepped backward, overwhelmed, but Adrian remained beside her with steady calm, as if this entire moment had already been decided long ago. "Mr. Cole," one reporter called loudly, "are you saying this woman has no corporate background at all?" Adrian looked directly at the reporter. "I'm saying she has character. That matters more to me." Another reporter raised her microphone quickly. "Miss Bennett, did you know this announcement was coming tonight?" Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her throat felt dry. "No," she admitted honestly. "I did not." A wave of whispers spread through the ballroom. Some shocked, some skeptical, some openly irritated. Claire could almost feel certain guests recalculating their opinions in real time now that Adrian Cole had publicly attached his reputation to hers. It made her deeply uncomfortable. Adrian noticed the panic slowly building behind her eyes. "Breathe," he said quietly beside her. She glanced toward him. "You should have warned me. You would have said no." Claire stared at him for half a second before realizing he was probably right. That somehow irritated her even more. The master of ceremonies handed Adrian a folder embossed with the Cole Foundation logo. Adrian opened it briefly, then passed it directly to Claire. Her hand shook as she accepted it. Inside were architectural renderings of community art centers, scholarship programs, mobile workshops for underserved neighborhoods across the country. Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, rural towns in Texas and Montana. Places where public school arts programs had disappeared years ago. Claire blinked down at the pages in disbelief. "This is real," she whispered. "Very real," Adrian answered. "And it needs someone who understands why art matters before money gets involved." Claire looked up slowly. "I'm a waitress. You are also an artist." Her breath caught again. "How do you know that?" Adrian's expression softened almost invisibly. The coffee receipt. The memory hit her instantly. 3 weeks earlier, after returning his wallet, Claire had rushed back into Romano's cafe, embarrassed and soaked from the rain. During a slow moment near closing time, she absent-mindedly sketched the skyline outside onto the back of a receipt while waiting tables. She never showed anyone her drawings, especially not strangers. "You kept that?" she asked quietly. Adrian nodded once. "Most people doodle flowers or initials while distracted. You drew perspective lines accurate enough for an architecture student." Claire stared at him speechlessly. Nobody had ever paid attention to her drawings before. Not seriously. Certainly not enough to remember them weeks later. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Whitmore finally stepped forward again, unable to hide her frustration now. "Adrian," she said sharply, "this is reckless." Every nearby conversation immediately stopped. Vanessa glanced toward Claire before. Continuing. "Running a national foundation requires experience, connections, discipline." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not emotional impulses because someone returned a lost wallet. Claire lowered her gaze instinctively. There was again the reminder that she did not belong in rooms like this. That kindness alone could never outweigh status. But Adrian's expression never changed. "Interesting," he said calmly. "You believe compassion and discipline cannot exist in the same person?" Vanessa folded her arms. "I believe billion-dollar organizations are not charity experiments." Adrian took one slow step closer. "And yet the woman you mocked tonight has shown more integrity in one evening than some board members have shown me in 10 years. The silence that followed was brutal. Several executives nearby suddenly looked very interested in their champagne glasses. Vanessa's face flushed beneath the ballroom lights. "You are humiliating me publicly." Adrian's voice remained perfectly even. "No, Vanessa. I simply stopped protecting people from the consequences of their behavior." Claire stared at him in surprise. Beneath his controlled tone, she could hear something deeper now. Exhaustion, disappointment, maybe even anger that had been buried for years beneath billionaire composure and polished interviews. Suddenly, the glamorous ballroom felt less like a celebration and more like a stage Adrian had grown tired of performing on. A photographer called for pictures near the front of the stage. Adrian ignored him completely. Instead, he turned toward Claire again. "You do not have to decide tonight," he said quietly. "The position is yours if you want it." Claire looked down at the folder in her hands. Her entire life suddenly felt impossibly small compared to what he was offering her. Tiny apartment, double shifts, subway rides home after midnight. Her mother falling asleep at the kitchen table beside unpaid medical bills. She had spent years surviving one paycheck at a time. And now, one of the richest men in America stood beside her offering a future she could barely comprehend. "Why me?" she asked softly. Adrian held her gaze for several long seconds before answering. "Because when everyone else in this city was trying to become important," he said quietly, "you were already becoming good." Claire felt her eyes sting unexpectedly. Around them, the ballroom remained silent beneath the chandeliers while cameras continued flashing and powerful people struggled to understand how a waitress in repaired shoes had somehow become the most important person in the room. By the time the gala finally ended near midnight, Claire felt like she had lived through 3 different lifetimes in a single evening. The ballroom slowly emptied beneath dimming chandeliers while wealthy donors disappeared into black luxury cars waiting outside along Fifth Avenue. Staff members quietly cleared crystal glasses and folded linen napkins with practiced efficiency, pretending not to glance toward Claire every few seconds. She still stood near the stage holding the Cole Foundation folder against her chest, unable to fully process that it belonged to her now, or could belong to her. Adrian remained nearby, speaking with board members who suddenly sounded unusually polite whenever Claire's name entered the conversation. She noticed it immediately. Hours earlier, those same people would not have looked twice at her. Now they smiled too carefully and called her Miss Bennett, as if respect could be switched on like ballroom lighting. It unsettled her more than the insults had. Vanessa Whitmore swept past the stage without another word, though the cold look she gave Claire lingered long after she disappeared toward the elevators. Claire exhaled slowly once the room finally quieted. "You survived," Adrian said softly behind her. She turned and found him loosening his tie slightly for the first time all night. Without the perfect billionaire posture, he suddenly looked more human. More tired. "Barely," Claire admitted. Adrian almost smiled. "Most executives panic faster than you did." Claire let out a nervous laugh. "That is because executives probably know what is happening." "Do you want to know what is happening?" he asked. She hesitated. "I am not sure anymore." Adrian motioned toward a quieter hallway away from the remaining staff. Claire followed him past. Towering floral arrangements and enormous framed paintings until they reached a private terrace overlooking the city. Cold November air wrapped around them instantly. Below, Manhattan glowed silver and gold beneath midnight traffic. Taxi horns echoed faintly from nearly 20 stories down, while steam drifted between buildings in the distance. For the first time all evening, the silence felt peaceful instead of suffocating. Claire stepped closer to the balcony railing and wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "You should not have embarrassed Vanessa like that," she said quietly after a moment. Adrian leaned against the railing beside her. "You mean after she embarrassed you?" Claire looked down at the city lights. "People like her always win eventually." Adrian studied her carefully. "That sounds personal." Claire gave a faint shrug. "It is New York. Rich people decide who matters." Adrian looked away toward the skyline. "You think I do not know that?" The answer surprised her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Adrian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded coffee receipt from Romano's Cafe. The edges were slightly worn now. Claire stared at it in disbelief. "You actually carried that with you tonight?" Adrian unfolded it carefully. Her small sketch of the rainy skyline still covered the back in faded blue ink. "I look at this whenever I forget something important," he admitted quietly. Claire looked at him, genuinely confused. "It is just a drawing." "No," Adrian said softly. "It is proof that someone can still create something beautiful in the middle of exhaustion." The words hit her harder than she expected. Nobody had ever described her life that way before. Exhaustion had simply become normal. Double shifts, late subway rides, stretching grocery money. watching her mother pretend not to cough during dinner because medication was too expensive. Beauty rarely entered the conversation. "You do not know anything about me," Claire whispered. Adrian folded the receipt carefully again. "Then tell me." She hesitated. The city wind brushed loose strands of blonde hair across her face, while traffic lights flickered below them like distant stars. "My father used to paint houses in Brooklyn," she said quietly. "Not artist houses, actual houses." Adrian listened silently. "When I was 12, he bought me a sketchbook from a dollar store because I kept drawing on napkins." A small smile touched her lips briefly. "He told me talent did not care whether people were rich." Her expression faded again. "Then he died before I graduated high school." Adrian's face softened almost invisibly. Claire continued staring at the skyline. "After that, survival became more important than dreams." "And your mother?" Adrian asked gently. Claire nodded faintly. "Heart condition. Some months are easier than others." Adrian looked down for a moment, his jaw tightening slightly. "That explains the second job." Claire glanced toward him in surprise. "How did you know about that?" "I had someone check your employment records after the wallet incident." Claire blinked. "That sounds incredibly illegal." Adrian actually laughed quietly then, low and genuine for the first time all evening. The sound startled her because it transformed his entire face. For a brief second, he looked younger, less guarded. "Probably," he admitted. Claire found herself smiling despite everything. The realization unsettled her immediately. This was dangerous territory. Billionaires did not enter ordinary lives gently. They changed gravity around them. Adrian studied her expression carefully. "You are afraid." Claire looked back toward the skyline. "You offered a woman who takes the subway home at midnight control over a $50 million project." Her voice softened. "Of course I am afraid." Adrian stepped slightly closer beside her, though still respectful enough to leave space between them. "Good," he said quietly. "Fear means you understand the responsibility." Claire looked up at him then, really looked at him for the first time beyond the tuxedo and headlines and impossible wealth. Beneath all of it stood a man who seemed deeply tired of shallow people, a man carrying loneliness as carefully as he carried power. And somehow, against all logic, she realized he was looking at her like she might be the first honest thing he had found in years. Claire barely slept that night. By the time she finally returned to her apartment in Queens after 1 a.m, the city had already transformed back into itself again. Garbage trucks rattled through narrow streets. Neon signs buzzed outside corner stores. Somewhere downstairs, a couple argued loudly through thin apartment walls while an ambulance siren echoed in the distance. The Billionaire Gala already felt unreal compared to the familiar cracked hallway leading to apartment 4B. Claire quietly unlocked the door and stepped inside, carrying the Cole Foundation folder against her chest like something fragile. The apartment smelled faintly of peppermint tea and old radiator heat. Her mother sat asleep on the couch beneath a blanket, television still glowing softly in the corner. Claire smiled tiredly and carefully removed her heels before walking farther inside. Then she froze. Her phone screen lit up violently with notifications. Hundreds of them. Messages, missed calls, news alerts, social media tags. Her stomach dropped instantly. Slowly, Claire opened the first article. Waitress stuns Billionaire Gala after Adrian Cole's shock announcement. Another headline appeared seconds later. Mystery woman captures billionaire's attention at charity event. Then another. Who is Claire Bennett? Claire's pulse quickened. Someone had already posted ballroom footage online. The video showed Vanessa mocking Claire near the entrance before Adrian stepped in front of her beneath the chandeliers. Millions of views in under 3 hours. Thousands of comments flooded beneath it. Some supportive, many cruel. Social climber, gold digger, Cinderella stunt. Claire stared at the screen in disbelief while her chest tightened painfully. People who had never met her were dissecting her life like entertainment. "Claire!" Her mother's sleepy voice broke through the silence. Claire quickly locked her phone. "Sorry, Mom. I did not mean to wake you." Her mother adjusted her glasses and sat up slowly on the couch. "How was the catering shift?" Claire opened her mouth, then stopped. How exactly was she supposed to explain any of this? Complicated, she admitted weakly. Her mother studied her face carefully. What happened? Claire hesitated before finally sitting beside her and handing over the phone. Her mother squinted at the article headlines, then looked back at Claire in complete confusion. Why is Adrian Cole standing next to you? Claire laughed nervously. That is a very long story. 2 hours later, after explaining everything from the lost wallet to the gala announcement, her mother remained silent for several moments. Finally, she looked toward the thick foundation folder resting on the kitchen table. You always did have strange luck, she murmured softly. Claire shook her head immediately. This is not luck. This is chaos. Her mother smiled faintly. Maybe, but it is also opportunity. Claire looked down at her hands. Mom, these people already hate me, and they do not even know me. She handed her mother the phone again. Cruel comments continued, multiplying by the second. One article had already posted photos of Claire leaving Romano's cafe in her waitress uniform from weeks earlier. Another somehow found old public records about her father's death and unpaid medical debt connected to the apartment lease. Claire suddenly felt exposed in a way she had never experienced before. Small, vulnerable, public. This world destroys people like me, she whispered quietly. Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand gently. No, sweetheart. People destroy people. Money just gives them louder microphones. Claire's phone buzzed again. Adrian Cole. She stared at the name for a long moment before answering. Hello. You saw the headlines, Adrian said immediately. His voice sounded calm, but beneath it she could hear frustration tightly controlled. Claire walked toward the apartment window, overlooking the dark street below. Your world moves very fast. Too fast, Adrian admitted. I should have prepared you better. Claire leaned against the wall beside the window. Did you know this would happen? Silence lingered briefly on the line. Yes, Adrian answered honestly. Then why do it? She asked quietly. Because hiding you would have proven them right. The answer landed heavily between them. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. Down on the street below, headlights swept across rain-soaked pavement, while strangers hurried home beneath umbrellas, completely unaware that her entire life had tilted sideways overnight. People think I planned this, she whispered. They think I chased you for money. Adrian's voice lowered slightly. Claire, listen to me carefully. None of those people know who you are. Maybe not, she replied softly, but they can still ruin things. Another pause followed. Then Adrian spoke more quietly than before. Do you want to know the truth? Claire swallowed. What? Almost canceled tonight. Her eyes opened in surprise. What? Adrian exhaled slowly on the other end of the line. Because somewhere along the way, I started caring what happened to you after people noticed me standing beside you. Claire's heartbeat stumbled unexpectedly. Neither spoke for several seconds. The silence no longer felt awkward. It felt dangerous, intimate in a way she was not prepared for. Finally, Adrian spoke again, softer now. Claire, if this becomes too much, I will understand if you walk away. Claire looked toward the foundation folder sitting on her kitchen table. $50 million. Community arts centers. Scholarships. A future bigger than survival. Bigger than fear. And if I do walk away, she asked quietly. Adrian answered without hesitation. Then they win. Claire stared out at the sleeping city beyond her apartment window while the weight of his words settled heavily inside her. Somewhere between the ballroom chandeliers and the midnight phone call, this had stopped feeling like a publicity story. It had become something far more dangerous. Something personal. 3 days later, Claire Bennett became the most talked-about woman in New York without leaving her apartment. Reporters crowded outside Romano's cafe, every morning hoping for photographs. Customers whispered while she worked. Some suddenly acted overly friendly. Others stared openly, waiting for proof that she was exactly what the internet claimed she was. A gold digger. A charity case. A waitress who accidentally climbed too close to billionaire territory. Claire tried ignoring it. She really did. But by Thursday afternoon, exhaustion sat behind her eyes like bruises. She had barely slept. Every news outlet seemed obsessed with turning her into either a fairy tale or a scam. Nobody asked whether she was scared. Nobody asked whether she even wanted any of this. Table 6 needs coffee, her manager muttered nervously. Even he acted differently around her now. Claire grabbed the coffee pot automatically and moved through the cafe while conversations lowered around her. Near the windows, two women in expensive coats quietly looked her up and down. "That is her," one whispered. "Honestly, she looks ordinary." Claire kept walking without reacting, but the words still landed harder than they should have. Ordinary, as if kindness only mattered when wrapped in wealth first. Her phone buzzed again inside her apron pocket. "Adrian." Claire stared at the screen for several seconds before finally answering during her break outside, near the alley behind the cafe. Cold wind rushed between brick buildings while delivery trucks rattled down the street nearby. "You look tired," Adrian said immediately. Claire frowned. "You cannot see me. I can hear it." She leaned against the wall quietly. Somehow his voice had already become dangerous comfort. "I think your city is trying to eat me alive," she admitted softly. Adrian was silent for a moment. "Meet me tonight." Claire closed her eyes briefly. "Adrian, I do not think that is a good idea." "Probably not," he admitted calmly. "Still, meet me." She almost said no. She should have said no. But at 7:30 that evening, Claire found herself standing outside a quiet art gallery in Soho while soft snow drifted through the Manhattan streets around her. The building looked closed from the outside, except for one warm light glowing faintly through the windows. Claire pulled her coat tighter and checked the address again. Before she could second-guess herself, the gallery door opened. Adrian stood there in a dark wool coat, snowflakes resting against his shoulders. "You came," he said quietly. Claire stepped inside before the cold followed her. Barely. The gallery was silent except for faint jazz music somewhere deeper inside. White walls stretched around them beneath soft golden lighting. No reporters, no cameras, no billionaires pretending to smile. Just stillness. Claire looked around slowly. "Why are we here?" Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked farther into the gallery and motioned gently for her to follow. Claire turned the corner behind him and stopped breathing for half a second. Her sketches covered the walls. Every single one. Drawings she barely remembered making after exhausting shifts at Romano's cafe. Subway passengers sleeping against windows. Rain puddles reflecting streetlights. A little girl reading books inside a laundromat while her mother folded clothes nearby. Old apartment rooftops at sunrise. Quiet moments nobody important ever noticed. Claire stared at the walls in complete shock. "What is this?" she whispered. Adrian watched her carefully. "The first honest art I've seen in years." Claire moved slowly through the gallery, overwhelmed. Some sketches had originally been drawn on napkins. Others on receipt paper or cheap notebooks she bought from dollar stores. Yet now they sat framed beneath warm gallery lighting like they mattered. At the center of the room stood a single glass display case. Inside rested the faded coffee receipt from Romano's cafe. Her rainy skyline sketch still covered the back in blue ink. Beneath it, engraved on a small silver plaque, were 6 simple words. "The night kindness found me." Claire's vision blurred unexpectedly. "Adrian," he stepped beside her quietly. "I spent years surrounded by people trying to impress me," he said softly. "Then one exhausted waitress chased me through freezing rain just to return something that was not hers." Claire looked down. Anyone decent would have done that. Adrian shook his head gently. "No, they would have calculated first." His voice lowered. "You did not." Snow drifted softly against the gallery windows outside, while silence wrapped around them. For the first time since the gala, Claire felt the noise around her life fading away. No headlines, no whispers, no cameras, just truth hanging quietly on white walls. "I do not understand why you care this much," she admitted. Adrian looked toward her sketches again before answering. "Because somewhere along the way, I forgot what sincerity looked like." His gray eyes finally met hers. "Then you walked into my life carrying coffee stains and exhaustion, and somehow reminded me I was still human." Claire felt her heartbeat stumble. The honesty in his voice frightened her because it sounded real. Too real. She looked away first. "You barely know me." Adrian stepped slightly closer, though still careful with the space between them. I know you returned the wallet when nobody would have blamed you for keeping it. His voice softened further. I know you create beauty even when your own life hurts. Claire's throat tightened unexpectedly. Nobody had ever looked at her like this before. Not as a project, not as a poor girl needing rescue, but as someone worth seeing completely. Adrian glanced toward the framed coffee receipt one last time. You asked me on the terrace why I chose you, he said quietly. Truthfully? Claire nodded faintly. Adrian held her gaze beneath the warm gallery lights, while snow continued falling outside the windows. Because everyone else in my world learned how to perform, he said softly. You never did. 1 year later, the same ballroom looked completely different to Claire Bennett. The chandeliers still glowed like captured stars above the Imperial Crown Hotel. Champagne still flowed across silver trays while Manhattan's wealthiest families gathered beneath marble columns and orchestra music. But this time, when Claire entered the room, nobody laughed. Conversations softened instead. Heads turned with genuine respect rather than amusement. And somewhere near the entrance, a young waitress carrying glasses paused just long enough to smile nervously at Claire before continuing toward the kitchen doors. Claire smiled back immediately because she remembered exactly what that kind of fear felt like. You are late, Adrian murmured beside her. Claire glanced toward him with a faint grin. That is rich coming from a billionaire who once made me survive a public ambush in heels. Adrian actually laughed quietly. A year earlier, the sound wave shocked her. Now it simply felt familiar, warm, real. The transformation between them had happened slowly after the gallery night. Not through dramatic declarations or tabloid headlines, but through small things. Early morning meetings over coffee instead of champagne. Long subway rides through neighborhoods where new community art centers were opening. Children proudly holding paint-covered sketches inside classrooms that had once sat empty. Adrian attending every launch quietly without demanding attention. Claire learning that beneath all his composure lived a man who carried responsibility like armor because nobody else around him ever truly understood loneliness. The Cole Foundation initiative had expanded faster than anyone predicted. 12 community art centers across the country. Scholarship programs in public schools. Mobile workshops traveling through neighborhoods forgotten by most politicians and investors. Every article that once mocked Claire eventually changed its tone. Not because she fought back publicly, but because results became impossible to ignore. Tonight marked the Foundation's 1-year anniversary gala. Giant digital screens along the ballroom walls now displayed photographs from programs across America. Children painting murals in Chicago. Veterans learning sculpture therapy in Texas. Single mothers attending evening photography classes in Detroit. Lives changing quietly because one exhausted waitress once returned a wallet in the rain instead of keeping it. Claire still struggled to fully accept how much her life had changed. Her mother's medical treatments no longer depended on late-night double shifts. Romano's Cafe now displayed framed newspaper articles proudly near the register. And somehow, despite all the chaos billionaire attention had brought in her life, Claire still carried the same softness Adrian noticed that first night. She still thanked janitors by name, still tipped subway musicians, still sketched strangers inside coffee shops when meetings overwhelmed her. Adrian loved that most about her. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Whitmore stood near a group of investors dressed elegantly as always. But tonight felt different. For the first time, people were not orbiting around her. They were orbiting around Claire instead. Vanessa noticed it too. Their eyes briefly met across the ballroom before Vanessa quietly looked away first. Not defeated exactly, just finally understanding that status alone no longer controlled the room the way it once had. Nervous? Adrian asked softly beside her. Claire adjusted the silver bracelet around her wrist. Always. Adrian studied her for a moment. Good. She laughed under her breath. You really enjoy saying that. Because you still care, he answered simply. The ballroom lights dimmed gently, then, as the evening presentation prepared to begin, applause echoed softly while guests turned toward the stage. Claire exhaled slowly, prepared herself for another speech about funding reports and expansion goals. But Adrian did not guide her toward the stage immediately. Instead, he stopped near the center of the ballroom, beneath the largest chandelier in the room. "Adrian," Claire asked quietly. He looked strangely calm suddenly. Too calm. Nearby conversations faded one by one as guests slowly noticed them standing alone beneath the lights. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket carefully. Claire's heartbeat stumbled immediately. "Oh no," she whispered. A small velvet box appeared in his hand. Around them, the entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Adrian looked at her with the same quiet intensity he had the first night he defended her beside the marble staircase. But now there was no loneliness left in his expression, only certainty. "1 year ago," he said softly, "this room laughed when you walked through those doors." Claire felt emotion rise instantly behind her eyes. Adrian stepped closer. They saw a waitress in repaired shoes. His voice lowered gently. "I saw the best person I had met in years." Silence wrapped around the ballroom. No cameras flashed. No reporters interactive. Even Manhattan's elite seemed to understand this moment belonged entirely to them. Adrian opened the velvet box slowly. Inside rested a simple, elegant ring beside the folded coffee receipt from Romano's Cafe. The tiny skyline sketch still remained visible in faded blue ink. Claire covered her mouth, instantly as tears blurred her vision. "I spent most of my life surrounded by powerful people," Adrian said quietly. "But kindness was the rarest thing I ever found." His gray eyes held hers completely. "Then one exhausted waitress ran through freezing rain to return my wallet and accidentally changed everything." A soft laugh escaped Claire through tears. Adrian smiled faintly before finally lowering onto one knee beneath the chandelier light. Somewhere in the ballroom, someone quietly gasped. "Claire Bennett," he said softly, "will you spend the